Hi, welcome to session number 8. First of all, let me offer my sincere apologies for not uploading any sessions for quite some time, essentially because of two reasons. Number one, I relocated to a new place, so it took some time for me to settle down. Secondly, the pandemic situation was also such that it kind of disrupted so much of life around, and it was not easy for me to get into the groove in between. And now things have stabilized a little bit, so I think that it is right time for me to start from where we left off, that is session number 7. In till that time, we covered a little bit about the ethical codes, various types of ethical codes, be they moral, legal, religious, and social codes. We closed that discussion there, and in this session we'll be talking about the biological basis of morality. Now, all that we have discussed so far is some kind of social regulation on human behavior. If you are a member of a particular society, then the society will wrap you with several types of codes so that your behavior is conducive to the overall functioning of the society. So, to enable the society to function smoothly, they bring in subtly as well as sometimes openly various types of enforcing codes, so which will be regulating your behavior. Fair enough, that is how all societies function. But one logical question that can emerge out of all this is it that we require only an external influence over us, external social influence over us, or is it also possible that we carry with us an innate urge to be either moral or immoral or whatever? Is there any innate sense of morality which we bring into this world when we are born? This is a question that requires examination not just from the philosopher's point of view, but also from the scientific point of view. Now, recent advances in science are throwing a lot of light over this, especially in neurosciences, the psychological uh, psychology, the science of psychology, that is, and also biology. A lot of things are happening in all these domains to let us gain a few more insights with respect to the biological basis of morality. Now, uh, unlike the social codes, different types of codes that operate on us, this is innate to us. This is not external to us. This is internal to us, internal to our being itself. So it is also open to certain controversy in the sense that uh, if you stretch this logic to the last point, some people could be born moral, some people could be born immoral, and there are various shades in between. Now, that obviously will be open to lots of scrutiny by the society because that would be disrupting the way that whole edifice has been built. The whole ethical edifice or the moral edifice has been built over centuries. So, therefore, that will be open to some kind of a scrutiny. So, without getting into too much of the controversy part, now let us try to understand exactly what we try to convey when we say that there is a biological basis of morality. Now let's come to the subject. Even if it's a bit of a rhetoric, I know that I'm making a rhetorical statement, but it does make sense when I explain that a little further to you. Uh, I would say I will open my argument by saying that all we are all creatures of nature. We are all creatures of nature. So nature has prepared us to survive and to be resilient, to be intelligent enough to be resilient to the evolutionary pressures, which can be both biotic as well as abiotic. These are all stresses. Various types of stresses work on us all the time. They could be, like, for example, this pandemic virus is biotic stress, and there could be climate change, which is abiotic stress. So, stresses are there, inevitable. it's a dynamic world and many things keep happening. But organisms that display a certain resilience to cope up with these pressures are the ones that will survive. That means the organisms that are alive and kicking as of now in the world around us are the ones who had displayed or who have displayed or who are continuing to display the resilience to cope up with all kinds of external pressures. I'll give you an example. From a very lowly cockroach to that of Homo sapiens, that is us. So we have a huge range of animal kingdom as well as, we also know that there is a huge plant kingdom. 120 million years ago, the cockroaches and the dinosaurs both roamed around on this earth. 120 million years later, we have the cockroaches, but we don't have the dinosaurs. They became extinct. Basically because the dinosaurs have not been able to or had not been able to cope up with the climatic changes or the kind of abiotic pressures, evolutionary pressures that were imposed on them as a species. So the point is that another 120 million years later, now let us just imagine. Now today we have both human beings and cockroaches living together, but 120 million years later, who knows, cockroaches may still survive, but we may not. So that means we may not have displayed enough intelligence, or our intelligence has not been sufficiently functional to make us resilient to survive all the pressures that the evolution throws at us. Okay, now the limited point that I want to make here is the primary rule of existence, therefore, is life itself, and life means biology. So, therefore, biology gives us the requisite wherewithal to cope with the kind of pressures that will be coming at us at various points of time. So, if one is intelligent enough, one survives. One is not intelligent enough to adapt to the changing environment, one doesn't survive, whichever is the species that we are talking about. Now, it may seem a bit of a stretch that I have brought cockroaches and human beings together and then trying to make a comparison. But it might seem a little preposterous that I'm talking like this. But when we analyze this, it won't be like that. I'll give you the examples. At least the evidence that is coming out of genetics will tell us that we share so much of our DNA uh, with mammals, obviously, quite clearly, because mammals are we are mammals, and there is so much of genetic proximity between us and the higher apes. Like for example, in case of chimpanzees or the rhesus monkeys, we do have we do share. In case of chimpanzees, I think it is 99.6%, as close as that. So, in other words, 99.6% of the DNA is shared between the chimpanzees and human beings. The deviation is just about 0.4%. But you see, externally, phenotypically, there is so much of divergence. But at the core, we are as close as 99.6%. Now, something similar with rhesus monkeys. Now, monkeys also have, that's about 93% or so. Then you might ask me a counter question saying that it's fine. They're closer relatives to us, mammals, and we know that they are pretty close. Okay, what about rats? What about cats? Well, cats, very interestingly, there is a particular species called the Abyssinian cat, which is as close as 90% with us. So 90% of the DNA is shared between us and the cats. Okay, and what about rats? Now, rats, you must be aware that most of our biological research uh, takes place on rats. and all the vaccines are first tested on the rats, and then the results are extrapolated, and then only human trials begin. That's because the genetic proximity between the rats and us is so high, it's as high as 85%. So, therefore, apparently it looks as if they are completely different creatures, and then there is no space for comparison. We are not comparable in that sense. But no, that doesn't seem to be the case. Biologically, we are far closer than what it appears. That is the limited point. Now, that is with respect to the animal kingdom and us. How about human beings? Within the species also, Homo sapiens sapiens. So within this species, we find that there is so much of divergence. Like we have Africans who look very different. The Caucasians, they are even more different. Then we have Asians, they're also different. One is white, one is black, one is yellow, and we are brown or maybe black, whatever. So the point is that there is so much of divergence physically that we just can't think that there is any connection between someone who is from Alaska and someone who is from, say, Kanyakumari. The difference is so much, or so we think. But genetically, can you guess that we are as proximate as 99.99%? That means the phenotypical divergence is just accounting for 0.01% of the total DNA that we have. Now that's a point that requires to be noted. So there is a big difference between the way it expresses itself and the way it is constituted internally. So there is a genetic proximity with animals. There is a genetic proximity within the species itself, which is too high for us to discount it. So keeping that, so this point will lead us to the next question. So does it mean that animals are also capable of some kind of moral behavior? That's a very good question to ask. Is there something to learn from the animals? Because they don't have the same kind of social orders as we have. We have constituted, we have created it over centuries. So we are regulated by law, we are regulated by society, we are regulated by religion, we are regulated by all kinds of codes we have evolved. They are not. At least prima facie, they are not. So they have to bring something with them in order to maintain social order. They're also living in groups. Like chimpanzees live in groups. Monkeys live in bands. Bands are group of monkeys is a band. So there are social animals. Ants live in societies. Honeybees live in societies. So if you have to live in a group anywhere in the world, if you have to live in a group, you have to have some kind of an order. And order means there has to be regulation. Now, regulation means there have to be some rules. And on what basis are these rules made? There has to be some sense of right and wrong somewhere. So that is the key presumption with which most of the research is taking place in the world, especially from the scientific field. Now, if that were the case, if it was so simple prima facie, how is it that our people have missed it all these years? Oh, that's another question that requires to be also discussed. Philosophers, ethicists of the earlier years, they have never bothered to look at the biological basis for human behavior. They never looked at it for two reasons. Number one, each one of them was unique in his own thinking style. They made some freestanding assumptions and they kept pursuing that particular assumption to the logical conclusion and it became a theory. Someone holds a particular view and assumes that to be true and then keeps defending it. And there are adherents to that particular theory. Likewise, there is another person who is talking in a different language. He's probably even at cross purposes with the one who had originally propounded something. So he's finding fault with the logic of the previous one and coming up with his own theory. So that is one, the freestanding assumptions which human beings are capable of making by virtue of their brain, and they keep working at them, and they are stuck in their own line. Then we do have another problem. The science acknowledging the outputs that are coming out of science was something which is completely alien to these people, because they're just thinkers. They will not factor in all the information that's coming out of science, and science itself was not so very well developed in the 19th century. So therefore the scientific findings were not coming their way, so therefore they could not factor them. Even people like Immanuel Kant, more recently Rawls, no one has taken into account the findings of the science with respect to the human behavior. That's why there hasn't been much growth in this field. In fact, ethics remains one of the most contested branches of philosophy, for this very fact that there are no verifiable foundations on which the subject is standing. There are no assumptions at all. These are all assumptions. There is no verifiable scientific basis for arriving at any particular conclusion. And that is why it remains one of the most fought over kind of branches of philosophy. And there is no one single theory, there is no one single person, and for every theory there is a counter theory. That is how ethics evolved all these centuries. But now a new dimension has been added to this. That is that when a person is born, he brings along with him a certain sense of what is right and what is wrong. How do we come to a conclusion? What kind of tests are there to determine this is also a subject matter for today's discussion. I would like to do one more session on that. This is going to be a bit long. For that, I will take two lines. One is the research that has been conducted on the animals is one. Secondly, the research that's conducted on human babies. Babies, especially when they are infants, apparently they also display a certain sense of certain moral sense, that they have an intuitive understanding of what is right and what is wrong. And I would like to take this forward in the next session. So I'm leaving you with the background as to why there is a biological basis for morality, and how do we establish that indeed there is something like this with some scientific approaches and evidence that has been built over the last 2 or 3 decades. In fact, most of the work has been done in the last 3 decades at the best. Even in the 70s also there isn't much research, because that's why John Rawls has stuck on to a certain theory which is not really founded on human behavior. Or even Freud also came up with this theory that a just born baby is like an open book, he would say, and all the morality that the baby gathers is only when he starts growing up and he's socialized by into the society, and then he keeps learning what is right and what is wrong. Otherwise he has no moral sense. That is what Freud had said, but the Freud's theory is substantially debunked now. I'll be talking about it in the next session. Thanks for being with me. And also, once again, I'm sorry that I couldn't really upload a good number of sessions in between. I should have done that. And some of you may have cleared the preliminary examination, and I wish you the best. And whatever these sessions are going to be, I hope they're going to be useful to you now. Thank you very much.